biggest conundrum advisors face today is how much should I be spending on technology and where should I be spending my money? Well, I'm here today with the expert on the subject, Joel Bruckenstein. Joel, thanks so much for taking some time to join us today.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Absolutely. Joel, talk to me a little bit about where advisors should be spending money when it comes to their technology investments.
Well, obviously it's a difficult question because generalizing across all advisors, advisors are kind of like snowflakes, everyone is different. But having said that, I think there are some commonalities across the board. One thing that I think all advisors should be looking at today is these new digital platforms, sometimes referred to as robo-advisors. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about exactly what robo-advisors are and where they fit into a typical advisory practice.
Right, and a lot of that comes down to, are they competition or is it something that can be used to build my business, really?
Right, well I think when most advisors think of robo-advisors and digital platforms, they're looking at the B2C ones, your Betterments, your Wealthfronts, and they assume that we're saying build something like that. That's not necessarily the case, right? I mean, you can use the digital part as opposed to the, let's say, marketing part of it, and use it to drive efficiencies in your own business. So to me, you have to separate the technology from the business model. They're two different things. You may not want to follow their business model, or you may, but whether you do or not, you definitely want to use that type of technology in order to gain some efficiency in your own practice.
Now, a lot of advisors get scared off by price tag. Let's step back for a minute. How much should advisors be spending right now when it comes to technology upgrades annually?
Well, again, I think it varies somewhat by firm. It depends where you are in the business cycle. It depends the type of business you have, whether it's an RIA firm, whether you're working with a broker-dealer. Some of it may be supplied by your broker-dealer or your custodian, so it varies. But as a general rule, I think most of the surveys that we see suggest that a good place to be is somewhere between 4 and 8% of revenues annually.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense, that number. And a lot of advisors, they kind of don't know where to get started when it comes to technology and why to get started. Talk to me a little about why advisors should be upgrading their technology. Is it to look better outwardly or is it more internal?
That's a great question, and I think the answer is both. Certainly, if you want to attract younger, affluent clients, you have to demonstrate that you're modern and that you can communicate with them the way they want to be communicated with. And old style technology is probably not going to cut it for those younger, more affluent demographics. That's number one. And as far as internally, yes, I mean there's a lot of things that advisors still do in their office that are manual processes that could be much more automated. And so if you can get more automated, you can handle more clients without hiring additional staff. So it definitely pays for itself if you spend wisely on technology.
So now if you're thinking about how you can look modern to that new young client, what are a couple essentials you should be thinking about adding to your practice?
Again, I think it varies somewhat by practice, but I think a couple of things are really essential. One is a good digital presence. So if you haven't updated your website recently and it doesn't work well with mobile devices, that's a big problem. I think in your office, people should be able to walk around and see the employees using the latest technology, whether it's a tablet, whether it's a high resolution screen in the meeting room, whether it's touch screens, digital signatures. There are many different ways to demonstrate that you're competent and you're on the cutting edge. And by the same token, there's many ways to demonstrate you're not, right? Putting old paper forms in front of people is not going to give them a warm, fuzzy feeling that you're on the cutting edge of technology.
I think a lot of advisors are overwhelmed by the amount of choices they have, software, hardware-wise. What are a couple ways to kind of feel a little less overwhelmed? I know you do a lot of great consulting work with these advisors. What are some things you go in right away to kind of, put them at ease?
Well, I think the first thing is to look at the fundamentals. And one fundamental is your broker-dealer or your custodian. I think that's often overlooked. If you don't have a custodian or a broker-dealer that's technology-friendly, you're not going to be able to implement the latest and greatest technology because they won't work with it. So it starts right there. And it starts with other fundamentals. Look at the things you already have in your office and say, are they the right tools for my practice? Core applications like CRM, financial planning, portfolio management and accounting software. Are you using the right things? Do you have a document management system? Are you using digital technology to sign and initiate account openings? Those are just a few things that are very basic.
So Joel, do you have any stories or any tales from the trenches on some clients that have done better with this?
Sure, I mean one example that we see very often has to do with CRM. So a lot of firms will go out and buy a CRM product and then they don't really make much use of it. They'll use it as what I would call an electronic Rolodex. as opposed to using it the way it should be used. So what we can help them do is, first of all, customize it to make sure it has all the right fields so they can capture more information about their client, so they're better informed about their client. And the other thing we can do is help them create workflows. So in other words, if you have a series of tasks, rather than have them as each individual task, which is very hard to track the whole process. So it might be something like an account opening process or a client onboarding process, an annual review process. You take all the steps, you put it into one workflow, it's one click, and that launches the workflow, and then you can track where you are in the workflow at all times so things don't fall through the cracks. That's just one example and a very common one.
And these are a lot of great tools, but it starts also with training. I know that you're a big advocate for training. This is something you constantly have to be reinvesting in, right?
Agreed. I think one of the greatest mistakes that advisors make is they go out and buy a technology, they put it in front of their staff, and they say, now go use it. You should probably be spending at the outset at least 20% of your budget on initial training and then on ongoing training. And depending on the type of software it is, it could be as high as 50%. It really depends.
So last question, this is something our audience is always dying to know about, hardware. Talk to me a little about the type of hardware advisors should have in terms of computers, et cetera, so that they can look cutting edge, but also they can perform cutting edge.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, for a long time, there weren't a lot of great leaps forward in hardware, so there wasn't a really important reason to upgrade, let's say, your iPad, because iPad 2 to iPad 5, it was really incremental changes. But if you're on an iPad 1 or an iPad 2, it's probably time to upgrade. You know, if you're in the Windows world and you don't have a touch screen, you probably need a new computer. If you're still using old style hard drives as opposed to solid state hard drives, it's probably time to upgrade.
And I'm surprised every time I have these conversations with advisors, the number that are still running Windows 98 or some other really antiquated software out there too. It's amazing.
It's amazing, and it's really dangerous because, you know, there are a lot of security holes in those systems. They're not all being upgraded the way they should anymore from a security standpoint, security patches. Plus, there are so many new features in the new operating systems that really do make you more productive. So if you're not running, you know, at least Windows 8.1 and you're in the Windows world, I think that's a problem. And by the same token, if you're using an older version of the Apple operating system, I would say the same thing, upgrade today.
Joel, those were some great insights. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. For Investment News, I'm Matt Ackerman.